After the divorce, my sister introduced me to a divorced man with a son. He wasn't much to look at, but his son was devastatingly handsome, like a little prince from old Europe. But there was something wrong with his son. No one could say exactly what, but apparently, he had suicidal tendencies and couldn't be left alone. My sister said that the man, Zhou Xing, worked on a ship, earning over $1 million a year, but he could only come home twice a year for about 10 days each time. If we got married, he would send all the money he earned back to me. I just needed to take good care of his son and make sure nothing happened to him. I met Zhou Xing for the first time at a Sichuan restaurant downstairs from my office. He was wearing a royal blue sweatshirt. A man nearing 40, he had a thick, sturdy build and a buzz cut. His appearance wasn't outstanding, but he looked clean and presentable. Before meeting him, my sister had shown me photos and told me the basic information. 38 years old, $1 million annual salary, divorced, with a 15-year-old son in a top high school who had suicidal tendencies. Is it okay if I ask why you and your ex-wife divorced? Zhou Xing smiled sheepishly, revealing 2 deep dimples and a set of white, even teeth. To be honest, I've been married 3 times. I was stunned. My sister hadn't told me that. One divorce could be due to incompatibility or spending too much time apart, but 2 or 3, that was a different story. Did he have a tendency to be violent? Or was he just trying to trick someone into taking care of his son, not intending to hand over his salary after marriage? I sized up the man 10 years my senior. His face looked gentle and honest, especially when he smiled, with a bit of a goofy air about him. My son is from my first wife. Her family was well off, and I was only making a little money back then, so her parents introduced her to a boss. I was forced to divorce. The man wrung his hands, his wheat-colored skin flushing red. He looked at the food on the plate, too embarrassed to look up at me. Usually, a man treated like that would hate his ex-wife's family. Now that he had financial strength, he should feel proud and think they were blind. But looking at Zhou Xing, I didn't see any hatred. He even seemed self-deprecating when he talked about it. Could the other 2 divorces be related to his first wife? Were they still involved? Maybe there were even significant financial dealings between them? Your first wife is very beautiful, right? I saw a photo of your son. He looks like he's mixed race. I didn't want to directly ask about the other 2 divorces, thinking there might be a white moonlight storyline involved. The smile on Zhou Xing's face was a little awkward. He just said, people say she is. Don't you think so? He shook his head. I don't have much of an eye for beauty, and I'm a bit face-blind. I don't really stare at faces. The food arrived, and we ate a little. Then I asked him, what about the other 2? Tell me, and I'll see if I can accept it. His face, which had been flushed, was now pale. His lips trembled, and when he bit into a piece of meat, he bit his lip. My son. He pondered for a long time, then put down his chopsticks and sighed. There's no point in hiding it from you. My son has some mental health issues. I know. He has suicidal tendencies, right? Yes. He nodded. Because of that, someone has to watch him all the time. But he's in his rebellious teenage years, so he really resents being watched. Zhou Xing wasn't picky about women. My sister had told him my basic information. 28 years old, an unstable monthly salary, likes to write. Divorced from her husband after 2 years of Cold War, no children. How about we get to know each other first? I was quite satisfied with Zhou Xing. Besides his high salary, which would allow me to stay home and write, it was rare to find a man who looked for the problem on himself after a divorce. He seemed like the type who looked simple-minded but could carry a family. I think you're very nice, someone who lives life practically. Zhou Xing lowered his eyes and smiled shyly. I noticed his eyelashes were very long, and the corners of his eyes curved upward. For someone nearing 40, his face had few wrinkles except for his tan skin. How can you tell after just one meal? I said, amused. He handed me a tissue while scanning the QR code to pay the bill, and analyzed it for me. Your hands are clean, with no nail polish. Your speech isn't aggressive, and you consider both sides of the issue. And, you didn't have any emotion when you praised my ex-wife's beauty. Then he shook his phone screen, showing the payment interface. 79 yuan. We weren't officially together, so splitting the bill was appropriate. He didn't need to say anything. I understood. I immediately took out my phone to add him as a friend and transfer the money, but I saw him put his phone away and rub his hands together. This restaurant is owned by a friend. He said it's the first time someone has brought a blind date to his restaurant and eaten so much Sichuan food for less than 100 yuan. He was so observant of details. This man wasn't as simple-minded as he seemed. I couldn't help but reevaluate him. How about this? If you think it could work, I'll take you home to meet my son in the next couple of days and see if you can accept him. He hesitated, looking nervous, his brow furrowed. He couldn't help but emphasize, I really think you're very nice. If it works out, I'll give you 1,000,000 yuan as a bride price and another 500,000 for the two of you to use. Tomorrow, it's the weekend. After exchanging contact information with Zhou Xing, I returned to the office and told my sister about the situation. Everything else was fine, but the way Zhou Xing tensed up every time he mentioned his son made me feel a little confused. With such financial conditions, few people would mind even 2 sons, let alone 1. Although the child had some issues, he was a high school student and didn't need much care in terms of daily life. Just keep a closer eye on him. Sis, how much do you know about Zhou Xing's son? Does he really hate stepmothers? My sister, like Zhou Xing, couldn't explain it clearly. He doesn't necessarily hate them, but you'll know when you meet him. He's a bit rebellious, don't be scared. Does he hit people? No, he doesn't get physical. I wasn't in a rush to get married, but I was curious about how a 15-year-old high school student with suicidal tendencies had scared away the previous 2 stepmothers. Early the next morning, I bought some gifts and drove with Zhou Xing to the most upscale villa district in the city center. This is a top school district, right? Bought it before for lighting schooling. It was quite cheap here back then. His name is Zhou Lighting? Yes, his maternal grandfather named him. The car stopped in the villa's garage. Zhou Xing led me inside. It's a bit messy. I already cleaned it yesterday, but I'm a rough guy, not that meticulous. I stood by the shoe cabinet in the entryway, changed into the new women's slippers Zhou Xing handed me, and scanned the house with my eyes. It was quite clean, just that things weren't very organized and were a bit messy. Lighting doesn't want a housekeeper, so it might be hard for you to clean up usually. He only takes care of his own room. High school students have little time to rest. It was a rare weekend, and Zhou Lighting hadn't gotten up yet, so Zhou Xing and I sat on the sofa chatting. I asked him several times about the reasons for the suicide attempts. Zhou Xing couldn't say for sure either. He summarized it as, no warning, no conflicts, and Zhou Lighting wouldn't say anything about it afterward. So I require him not to close his bedroom door at home. I also removed the lock from his bathroom door, and I installed all-around surveillance in the house. He was afraid I'd mind, so he quickly shook his head and waved his hand, explaining, there's no surveillance in our room. It's all for him. Even so, I still felt a little uncomfortable. A 15-year-old boy wasn't a child. To live under family surveillance with no absolute personal space and no privacy, it was suffocating. Doesn't he have any objections? He's quite obedient. He's willing to listen if I say it a few times. Just as I was wondering what kind of trouble such an obedient child could get into, slow footsteps came from upstairs. Looking up, I saw a boy in a white t-shirt and gray shorts rubbing his slightly long, messy hair and walking down the stairs with half-open eyes. Just like in the photos, the child was exceptionally handsome. Unlike his father's tan skin from being out in the wind and sun, he had pale, cool skin. Except for his eye color, he looked a lot like a little prince from old Europe. His hair is so long. He doesn't even think about getting it cut. He doesn't look like a student at all. Got it. I'll get it cut this afternoon. Unlike the nervousness and shyness he showed when interacting with me, Zhou Xing immediately adopted the demeanor of a parent when facing his son. After saying that, he felt he shouldn't have embarrassed his child in front of me, so he quickly forced a smile and introduced me. This is your... He paused. I quickly jumped in. Yang Qian, just call me Aunt Qian. Aunt Qian. 15-year-olds were rebellious and more likely to reject stepmothers. I thought I'd be made things difficult for, or at least get a cold glare. But Zhou Lighting was very obedient, even more composed and generous than Zhou Xing. His eyes kept sizing me up, spending the longest time on my face. Is Aunt Qian going to marry my dad? At noon, we booked a private room at a hotel. Zhou Xing went to order food. Zhou Lighting sat across from me, one hand propping up his chin, looking at me with lowered eyelids. His eyelashes were long and thick, like Zhou Xing's. Yes, we get along well. Today we mainly want to hear your opinion. I don't agree, but if no one is watching me, he can't go to sea with peace of mind, so I can only agree. You're very straightforward, you say what's on your mind. That's good. You better be prepared. That's my home. I won't change my habits just because someone else moves in. Unlike when Zhou Xing was around, Zhou Lighting's obedience disappeared when Zhou Xing wasn't present, becoming sharp and aggressive. But that wasn't enough to make 2 stepmothers divorce, was it? How's the chat going? Zhou Xing came back, holding 3 bottles of yogurt, placing one in front of each of us. He looked at Zhou Lighting and said, your Aunt Qian is a nice person. We're preparing to get our marriage certificate as soon as possible. You? Zhou Lighting stared at me meaningfully, revealing a slightly sinister smile. She is nice. Some people will always make the wrong choices for money, then suffer for that choice, and finally run away in defeat. Lighting. Okay, I won't say any more. Zhou Lighting opened the yogurt and took a sip, then suddenly handed the one he drank from to me. Zhou Xing was about to scold him for being rude when I calmly exchanged that yogurt for the unopened one in front of me, opened it, and took a sip. His provocation was too easy to understand. I didn't have to take the bait. On Monday, a workday, Zhou Xing and I hastily got our marriage certificate and moved my luggage into the new house. Actually, Zhou Xing should have gone out to sea long ago, but because he couldn't find anyone to take care of Zhou Lighting, he had been delaying it for some time. Any later, and he'd miss the season. Most of the time there's a signal on the ship now, but there are also sea areas where you can't be reached. I'll tell you in advance when that happens. You don't need to worry too much about Lighting's other things. He's fine on his own. It's just that you need to check on him every 2 hours, especially at night. If he does anything excessive, tell me, and I'll call and scold him. He's still obedient. Don't be afraid. On the way to send Zhou Xing to the ship, he meticulously explained everything. The heavy luggage in my hands kept sliding down. I wanted to help him, but he waved his hand, not letting me. You couldn't tell he was a man making $1 million a year. He was as solid as a longshoreman struggling for a living. I remember everything you said. Be safe on the ship. I'll pay attention to Zhou Lighting's situation at all times. Don't worry. The roar of the large fishing boat faded away from the coastline. I gazed into the distance and suddenly felt a bit of heartache. That $1,000,000 wasn't a small amount for people like us who earned $3,000 a month. But it was also something he earned year after year, risking his life in the dangerous seas. I had seen his wardrobe. They were all work clothes that cost 100 yuan or so, washed until they faded and lost their shape. As long as they weren't torn, he would still wear them. I believed Zhou Lighting saw all of this, so even though he was in his rebellious period, he was very obedient in front of Zhou Xing. But what about in front of me after Zhou Xing left? On the way back, I couldn't help but ponder this question. Day students didn't have evening self-study. When I got home, I saw warm light coming from the first floor, indicating Zhou Lighting had come home from school. Just as I opened the door to enter, he came down from the first floor. Perhaps he was going to the refrigerator to pour ice water. He was holding a transparent water bottle in his hand. It was originally a very ordinary encounter, but when I saw him, I was so shocked that I stood rooted to the spot, almost turning around and running away. Zhou Lighting wasn't wearing anything. He was completely naked at home. 15 years old. He wasn't a child anymore. Although his frame had the slenderness of a teenager, he was also tall and straight. If you didn't know his age, he was almost indistinguishable from a 20-year-old adult male. Sorry. I'll wait for you to go back to your room. I quickly turned around, facing away from him, secretly blaming myself for coming home at the wrong time. Or maybe I should have texted him in advance to let him know I was coming home so he could prepare. It's okay. Unexpectedly, a faint chuckle came from behind me. Zhou Lighting wasn't as nervous as I was. His slippers calmly crossed the living room, went to the refrigerator, and poured ice water into the water bottle. Just get used to it. I'm like this at home. What? It took me a while to react. Did he mean that even with a stepmother present, he liked to run around naked at home? Being new here, I felt uneasy and nervous about being a guest, and I also knew my place as an outsider. Okay, I'll try not to look. Look if you want. It's not like I'm charging you. Hurts the eyes. Maybe that made him unhappy. He didn't say anything, and his footsteps were a little faster as he went upstairs. After hearing his footsteps enter the room, I turned around to change my slippers and texted Zhou Xing / your son just treated me to a bodybuilding show. He seems very confident in his body. That's a good thing. With a good internet connection, Zhou Xing could see all the images on the surveillance cameras except for those in our room. 5 minutes later, I received a reply / don't be afraid. I'll talk to him. 15 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Zhou Lighting stood at the door with a sullen face, one hand propped on the door frame, leaning closer with a menacing air. He gritted his teeth and said, "You told my dad on me?" I wouldn't say that. He can see it on the surveillance cameras. Knowing to put on shorts before coming to confront me, I was quite relieved. You can wear whatever you want. I'm just sharing my life with my husband. Did he say something to you? The tit for tat meaning was too obvious. Zhou Lighting wasn't in the right. He glanced at me out of the corner of his eye, flung his hand, turned, and left. Are you eating dinner tonight? I'm full just looking at you. That's good. Take a few more looks, so I don't have to cook. According to Zhou Xing's instructions, I would check on Zhou Lighting's situation every 2 hours to ensure that if there was a problem, it could be discovered in time to save him. Zhou Lighting was clearly unhappy about this, but he had promised Zhou Xing not to close his door, so even if he was unhappy, he could only endure it. During the day, he went to school, and I used the spare room at home to set up a quaint study, then nestled inside to write. I took pictures of the decorated study and sent them to Zhou Xing. His hearty laughter came from the distant sea, carrying the blazing sun and salty sea breeze, making my mood soar. I've always liked Chinese-style studies, but I haven't had the heart to decorate one. Can I play with it when I get back and enjoy some elegance? I'll wait for my husband to come home and enjoy tea and incense. Excellent, excellent. If you buy anything too heavy to move, hire someone to help or order lighting to do it. Don't tire yourself out. He carefully instructed me one sentence after another. I responded a few times, but the signal wasn't good, so we didn't chat much. As soon as I hung up the video, outside the open study door, Zhou Xing was in his school uniform, leaning against the doorframe. He looked at me with a cold sneer, then turned and went back to his room. Are you eating dinner tonight? I chased after him. He was taking off his school uniform, glanced at me, and continued to undress without any care. It's okay. You can starve me to death. I watched him take off his school uniform, one hand resting on his only pair of black shorts, competing with me between taking them off and not taking them off. I felt inexplicably amused. I wouldn't dare. There would be enough resentment if you died. What do you want to eat? Scrambled eggs with tomatoes, noodles with minced meat, and how about a stir-fried pork? I didn't know what was wrong with these dishes. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes as he looked at me, then he frowned in confusion. He quickly concealed it, and I didn't ask further. These were all dishes he liked. I had asked Zhou Xing in advance. I wasn't targeting Zhou Xing. On the contrary, I wanted to please him so we could get along well in the future. But it was obviously not easy. There was a very high wall in this child's heart. He seemed obedient and carefree, but in reality, he was repressed and xenophobic, like a constantly heating volcano, not knowing when it would erupt. We were very silent, and when we did speak, we were impolite and argued with each other. After dinner, I went back to my room to take a bath and sleep. Zhou Xing would always study until about 2 in the morning, then curl up in his pure black bed, sleeping like an abandoned kitten. We got along peacefully like this for a month or two. High school students didn't need me to worry about anything except for one meal a night. I had a lot of free time, so I considered that he worked hard in class and offered to help him do laundry and tidy up his room. He would always look at me with a disgusted and revolted expression and say, "If you dare touch my things, I'll throw them away immediately." Since that was the case, I simply ignored him, letting him tell me himself when he needed something. On the first day I came here, I had set an alarm to go off every 2 hours, as suggested by Zhou Xing. In the past, I had always been woken up by the alarm, but not this day. It wasn't even late at night. I had just fallen asleep and wasn't resting very well. In my sleep, I could hear faint screams reaching my ears. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as I slowly woke up, I realized the sound was coming from the house. Was Zhou Xing watching a horror movie to relieve stress? Listening carefully, I also heard some strange panting. I was very sleepy. If it was any other child, I would have continued sleeping, but Zhou Xing was different. I was afraid something would happen to him, so I had to get dressed and go out to check the situation. Who knew that this one look would almost leave me with a lifelong psychological shadow? Zhou Xing's room door was still open, with only a desk lamp on. His computer was playing some extreme and disgusting colored images. The poor women inside were screaming their hearts out. And in front of such a screen, Zhou Xing was huddled in the chair, facing away from the door, with his feet stacked on the table, actually doing something that shouldn't be seen by anyone. He seemed to know I was there, but he didn't move. I faintly heard a provocative chuckle from his throat. Zhou Xing hadn't given him personal space. He had promised not to close the door, and he hadn't closed it even at this time. I was horrified. I should have turned around and left, but my footsteps were heavily nailed to the spot. I was as still as a log. Until almost 10 minutes later, he finished and said without turning his head, "Wasn't it 2 hours yet? Did I scare you awake?" "Yeah. Your computer's a little loud." I don't know how I managed to talk to him calmly. Stumbling upon something like this should have been mostly embarrassing, but I felt cold all over because of the videos on his computer. I finally understood why Zhou Xing's previous 2 wives had divorced and why they could give up a life of luxury at home, being supported by $1 million a year. A 15-year-old boy was watching bloody, extreme violent images to relieve his desires, and he felt excited in the face of such misery. This was too horrifying. I wasn't facing a stepson, but a budding violent criminal, a potential executioner ready to wield the butcher's knife. Why do you like watching this kind of thing?" He was surprised that I hadn't run away in a panic, but it was only for a moment. After pulling up his pants, he turned to look at me, the blush on his face hadn't faded, and there was madness in his eyes. "Don't you think some people in this world deserve to be treated like this? It's a pity I can't do it myself, otherwise I'd have even harsher methods." The night wind was blowing through the window that wasn't tightly closed. The wailing wind sounded like ghosts from hell crying, making Zhou Lighting's half-lit, half-shadowed face even more sinister. The way you release your emotions. I can kind of understand it. I really didn't expect I'd have the courage to walk into his room and sit on the carpet beside his bed, looking up at his slightly puzzled expression. Can you tell me, who are you targeting? Of course, I'll keep it a secret. TCH. He sneered, pointing his finger at the camera above my head. Keep it a secret? I have no secrets. He had no right to privacy. Every moment was like running naked for him. You know what? I hate women, all women. He stared at me, the intense resentment in his eyes horrifying. The fingers gripping the edge of the desk were white with effort, and he bit down as he emphasized each word. They all deserve to die. Surrounded by the surging black emotions, I was momentarily at a loss because he said all, but the word he used wasn't you, but them. In other words, I wasn't yet included on his list of people who deserve to die. Because of your birth mother, right? You think she abandoned you, so you hate her? Were you? I hesitated before asking, were you abused by your stepmothers? This time Zhou Lighting didn't answer. The storm hidden in his dark eyes was both calm and profound, not like a teenager at all. The first time I saw him coming down the stairs without any clothes, there was a faint white scar on the chest of his slender body, running from his shoulder all the way to his abdomen. Now, looking closely, he had many scars on his body. His young body had good healing ability, so they were only faint white marks, blending in with his pale, cool skin. Go back to sleep. Too much talking in the middle of the night. He almost acknowledged it, turning his head away from me, his eyelashes drooping down to cover his gaze, forming a wall of self-protection. I'm afraid you'll commit suicide. Then stay and sleep with me? No, 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 I'm even more afraid you'll kill me. I quickly got up and waved my hand to leave. At the door, I was still worried. I'm going back. You can call me if you want to chat. There are no cameras in my room. Zhou Xing hadn't told me the truth. Or maybe it was my fault for not asking deep enough and being fooled by his few words. There must have been more to the story between them and the two previous women. There was a time difference at sea. When I sent him a message, he was still working. It wasn't until an hour later that he was free to reply to me. Zhou Xing didn't want to mention these things. He had to reveal the secrets of the past after I pressured him. After divorcing Zhou Lighting's mother, Zhou Xing had a period of wandering the streets with his child, with nothing to eat. That year Zhou Lighting was 5 years old. His grandmother had died early, and his grandfather had just passed away. Zhou Xing took his child alone to drive and haul goods for people. To save money on hotels, they basically lived in the car. In the winter, the broken minivan leaked air. The child was sick every few days. There was nothing he could do, so he wanted to take the child to see his maternal grandparents to see if they could help take care of him for the winter. That was the first time Zhou Lighting had seen his mother and maternal grandparents since he could remember. He was overjoyed when he went. He picked out his favorite outfit from a pile of old clothes and also picked out a lot of snacks at the convenience store to give them as gifts. Zhou Xing also thought the child was so sensible that they would definitely be happy. If they could cultivate a relationship, his mother could contact the child more often in the future. But no one expected the outcome. Not only did they chase the two of them out, refusing to acknowledge that Zhou Lighting was that woman's child, but they also trampled all of Zhou Lighting's carefully selected gifts, warning Zhou Xing, if you dare to come looking for trouble again, I'll sell this child. That day, 5-year-old Zhou Lighting squatted silently among the goods in the minivan. That day, Zhou Xing, feeling deeply guilty, had a car accident absent-mindedly. Long after the violent impact, little Zhou Lighting crawled out of the mess, enduring the pain of a broken shoulder, at a loss and wanting to pull his unconscious father out. But he was too small. He couldn't even open the twisted car door. He didn't know who to ask for help, so he could only run back to the woman who didn't acknowledge him, kneeling and begging that family to save Zhou Xing. He was crying, afraid to cry out loud, and kept saying, I will definitely repay you, please, I only have my dad. He went at the wrong time. It just so happened that his mother's new, remarried boss came to pick her up. His maternal grandparents panicked. Seeing that they couldn't be driven away with mops and chairs, his maternal grandfather slammed him hard on the back with a chair, lifted him by the arm of his broken shoulder, dragged him out of the complex, and threw him into the stinking river ditch outside. No one knew how Zhou Lighting, who couldn't swim, climbed out of the stinking water, and no one knew how much pain he was in. All they knew was that he begged people one by one on the road and finally saved Zhou Xing's life. From then on, the words mother and mom never appeared in his mouth again. Later, I also did the wrong thing. Zhou Xing thought that if there was someone at home to take care of Zhou Lighting, he could rent a cheaper house and let the mother and son stay in the rented house, rather than living in the car with him. Zhou Xing in his youth was as fair-skinned as Zhou Lighting and quite likable. Someone introduced him to a woman who had returned from a big city, and he agreed without thinking. She abused Zhou Lighting, right? I saw many old scars on his body. Yes, Lighting never told me. Zhou Lighting was only in elementary school. He didn't know what marriage meant. He only knew that when the woman was at home, Zhou Xing would have a hot meal when he came back, and he wouldn't worry about him when he left. She was one way in front of me and another way in front of the child. But I didn't realize it at all back then, until Lighting was seriously injured and bleeding, ran to the neighbors for help, and was sent to the hospital by the brother next door. Only then did I learn that she used to sell her body in a big city and was discovered. She couldn't marry anyone after she came back, and she only found me out of desperation. Desperately finding a man she looked down on and having to take care of his little burden. It was imaginable how much resentment a woman who was used to a life of luxury outside had nowhere to vent. After that, Zhou Xing found a job on a ship. An old master saw that he was down to earth and could endure hardship and was willing to take him under his wing. But with no one to take care of Zhou Lighting, how could he be at ease leaving home for half a year or more? The woman also heard that the income on the ship was high and refused to divorce. She knelt on the ground and begged Zhou Xing to give her a chance, promising that she would treat Zhou Lighting well and never hit the child again. As a result, that year the harvest was bad, and there was a problem with the ship. We didn't catch the season, and everyone didn't make any money. We went home with our heads hanging low. She filed for divorce after you got home? She went crazy and smashed everything in the house. If I hadn't protected him, a whole pot of boiling water would have been poured all over Lighting. Zhou Xing didn't go into detail about the pot of boiling water. It wasn't until I saw him change clothes later that I saw the large burn on his back. What about the last one? How did she? I originally wanted Zhou Xing to explain everything at once, but suddenly there was a storm there. The signal was like seawater that was picked up and thrown down by the sea breeze, intermittent and unable to form a sentence, and then the call was cut off. You want to know how my previous stepmother got divorced? Suddenly, the voice of a teenager startled me. To pay attention to Zhou Lighting's movements at all times, I wouldn't close my room door completely when I was resting, but would leave a small crack. At this time, Zhou Lighting was standing in the crack outside the door, with a teasing and sarcastic smile in his tone, obviously quietly eavesdropping outside for a long time. I'll just tell you directly. After all, I'm the one who knows the truth. He eavesdropped on my phone call without permission, but he didn't break into my room without permission. He raised his hand and knocked on the door twice. Can I come in? Yes. After getting my affirmative answer, Zhou Lighting pushed open the door, holding a bottle of cold cola in his fingertips, and nestled lazily and casually into the sofa next to my bed. You've been at my house for almost a month, right? It's been more than a month. I remember you went through 2 monthly exams. The teacher said you've made great progress and may be able to enter the sprint class next year. You even joined my class's parent group? Zhou Lighting smiled meaningfully, with disgust and nausea. He turned his head to hide the emotion flashing in his eyes, and his eyelashes trembled slightly. I pretended not to see it. Your dad isn't home. These are all things I should care about. Someone always has to reply with "received" in the group. In the quiet night, only the wind occasionally brushed against the window, slapping the reflections of the messy branches outside on the glass. She was introduced to him, just like you, and used to be a telephone operator in the maintenance center in the community. He was silent for a long time, slowly raising his head and looking at the ordinary round ceiling lamp on the ceiling. We had a little money back then and had already bought this house. My dad gave her the same conditions as he gave you. As long as she could take good care of me, all the salary would be turned over to her. When that woman first entered the house, she was very different. She enthusiastically pleased Zhou Xing and his son, allowing the 2 wandering men to experience the warmth of a family for the first time. That should have been Zhou Lighting's most cheerful period. Because of the beauty of that time, Zhou Lighting made amazing progress in his studies, leaping from a failing student in the back of the class to the top few in the top class. But the bumpy road of this father and son did not end there. Such a beautiful life lasted for less than 2 years. One day, when Zhou Lighting came home from school, he heard her talking to Zhou Xing on the phone. The words she said were very harsh. It seemed that Zhou Xing's income was only about 800,000 yuan that year, which was different from the promise she had been given. Middle school students already had a complete concept of money. He didn't think they needed to spend so much money at home, so he secretly observed the woman's spending habits. He used his mobile phone to search for the items in the woman's room. He not only found a large number of light luxury goods worth tens of thousands of yuan, but also found many receipts, manicures for over 1,000, hairstyles for over 2,000, and even meals for over 5,000 and plastic surgery bills for tens of thousands. Zhou Lighting was furious at the time and angrily told Zhou Xing about this. But Zhou Xing was honest and didn't have much of a temper. He always liked to be considerate of others. He felt that although the woman spent money lavishly, she was good to the child and had never mistreated Zhou Lighting. He said, people will be more free and easy when they suddenly have money, just like a nouveau riche mentality. It's okay. Dad has now started to get on the right track, and he will earn more than this in the future. Zhou Xing was right. Although that woman spent money lavishly, she had never mistreated Zhou Lighting. It could even be said that she was very caring. She even personally took Zhou Lighting to pick out his underwear and socks. So, although Zhou Lighting was angry, he didn't really think about what to do. Until the year he was in the 3rd grade of junior high school. I was sitting on the bed reading a book at the time. Zhou Lighting suddenly stood up and moved closer to me, kneeling on the edge of the bed and staring straight into my eyes. He picked up my right hand and placed it on his neck, then moved it down little by little, sliding to his chest and abdomen. Middle school and high school are the development stage for boys. Zhou Lighting was tall and upright. Removing the immaturity of a teenager, he was clearly a man exuding light and heat. He wanted to move it further down. I realized the danger and withdrew my hand in panic. That's how she took my hand, put it on her own body, led me to touch her, and then tore off my pants. He didn't continue with the following words. I saw the disgusting and repulsive look in his eyes, and how could I not understand? That woman had fallen in love with her stepson and did the most inappropriate thing, leaving an indelible psychological shadow on a 3rd grader. Why did she leave later? Because of the scene you saw today, because she discovered the tools I had stored under the bed, because she knew that I wasn't even afraid of death. Not only him, but when I videoed with Zhou Xing at night, the man on the other end also smiled reluctantly, looking like an old boat that had been washed by seawater, frowning weakly, and speaking with careful flattery. How long can you rest this time? Maybe, a bit long, until, after the new year. His throat choked, and his eyes were a little red, which wasn't very obvious on his wheat-colored skin. The corner of his mouth pulled up wasn't a smile at all, it was uglier than crying. What kind of grievance did you suffer? What grievance? Who would give me a grievance on the ship? The wind and waves are just a bit big. Then it's settled. Zhou Lighting and I will go to sea to pick you up on New Year's Day. Okay, good. He agreed absent-mindedly twice, made an excuse to go out of the cabin to take a look, and cut off the video. In the following period, the father and son were exactly the same, both like eggplants beaten by frost. Even Zhou Lighting's tone when arguing with me became soft, and he occasionally helped me clean the public areas. He would even bring me chicken racks when he passed the fried chicken shop on the way home. Seriously, the attitude of you father and son is like being caught for going whoring as a group. Zhou Lighting bit his chopsticks so hard they crackled. Yang Qian, can you speak human language? Call me Aunt Qian, or call me Mom. There is no word mom in my dictionary, give up. In a flash, it was almost New Year's Day. I packed a few thick winter clothes and daily necessities. Zhou Lighting took 2 days off in advance. The two of them dragged their suitcases to the port to take a cheap small yacht that had been booked in advance. According to plan, we would meet Zhou Xing at the nearest port outside that supplied the fishing boat, and then take the fishing boat he drove back to experience life on the fishing boat. Zhou Xing had been absent-minded during this time, and the signal was not very good. It wasn't until we got on the small yacht and sent him a message that he woke up and sent us a video. Lighting, Qian. You really set off? Yeah, on the yacht. We agreed to go to sea to pick you up, did you forget? I waved to him on the video with Zhou Lighting. Zhou Xing smiled reluctantly, raised his hand and wiped his face. Why don't you have fun for a while, and then take the yacht back? Life on the fishing boat is very hard, I'm afraid. This time we came to experience hardship, right, little Ting. I patted Zhou Lighting's shoulder, ignoring the eye roll he left when he turned his head, and continued to say to Zhou Xing, the child wants to see his dad, I want to see my husband, what are we afraid of? Hee. Zhou Xing on the video kept rubbing his face and hands. A man in his 40s, he smiled like a shy and silly fool. After smiling, he quickly fell into sorrow again, the corners of his eyes began to turn red again, and he didn't know what was stuck in his throat, and he kept swallowing. Seeing his appearance, Zhou Lighting next to him blinked his eyes, got up and said he was going to the bathroom, and ran away as if fleeing. Okay, I won't talk to you anymore, you're busy, call us when you dock. The winter sea breeze carried a salty and humid coolness. 3 days later, we finally met Zhou Xing at the small port. He was wearing a dark green raincoat, took me and Zhou Lighting to eat grilled fish at the nearest restaurant. Before getting on the boat, he took off the raincoat and gave it to me, helping me carefully button it up. The wind is strong outside, the umbrella can't hold it, don't catch a cold from the rain. It's only a few steps. Besides, why aren't you too afraid of catching a cold? We're both thick-skinned, we won't catch a cold. Zhou Xing was 10 years older than me, and he took care of me more carefully than he took care of Zhou Lighting. A crack broke in the wooden pedal on the boat. He was afraid that I would step into it with one foot, so he had to carry me on his back. The sailors on the boat laughed at him. Old Zhou can't wait to enshrine his new wife. They laughed, but after laughing, the faces of several sailors fell down again. Some walked away and sighed faintly, and some shook their heads while wiping their faces. What's wrong? We're about to go home for a reunion. Why do I feel like everyone is sad? No, it's okay, it's just that everyone is tired. You, don't think too much. Life on the fishing boat was not as good as on the yacht, but Zhou Xing had his own small single room, which he had cleaned and tidied before coming to pick us up. Zhou Lighting went to squeeze into the dormitory with the sailors, leaving the independent space for us. I got rained on when I got on the boat. Zhou Xing changed clothes in the corner. The water droplets on his hair slid down his muscular back, stayed in the lumbar dimples, like a vessel carrying wine slightly tilted, pouring that mellow wine into the secret space below the man. I'll help you wipe it later. I got up and took the towel from his hand, rubbing the skin on his back. It was at this time that I saw clearly the healed and old burns on his back, as well as countless large and small scars. The heat rising from the man's body rolled over, carrying a reassuring breath. I stroked those scars and asked him, did it hurt a lot back then? No, it's okay. He was different from Zhou Lighting. It seemed that no matter what he experienced, he never complained, and he never complained. He just lived a not-so-peaceful life silently. Okay, you rest first, I'll come back as soon as I'm done. His back tensed and stiffened. He suddenly grabbed my hand, quickly put on his clothes, and ran out of the cabin as if running away. I only saw a blush on his wheat-colored skin, even the tips of his ears were red, and I couldn't help but smile secretly for a long time. It wasn't until I was half asleep that Zhou Xing finally came back. The wind and waves were very strong at night, and the fishing boat was undulating and shaking. He hugged me from behind, put his head on my shoulder, and wrapped us tightly in the quilt. Like many arranged marriages, there was a lack of emotional foundation between us. There was more of a first impression and that bit of calculated goodwill, so being close together wasn't that intimate. But after being close for a long time, some changes will naturally occur. His breathing became heavier and heavier, and he turned over to face away from me as if afraid of being discovered. I really like you, Zhou Xing, and you are also worth being liked. I turned over and hugged his waist and asked, what about you? What do you think of me? Very good, I like you very much. He didn't expect that I was still awake, his tone was a little panicked, he turned around and wanted to hug me, but he was hesitant and didn't want to get close with hesitation and concern. I didn't know what his concerns were, and I felt vaguely disappointed. I wasn't very lustful, but I also cared about whether I was attractive in front of my husband. There was nothing wrong with Zhou Xing's body, but he refused to have intimate relations with me, which was a great blow to me. We were both divorced, and we weren't little girls who needed to keep our bodies pure. Even if we were, we are now legally married. Go to sleep. I raised my head and kissed the corner of his lips, pulled up a wry smile, turned over, and didn't say anything more. Old Zhou, get up and take a look. The waves are rising. Near the national border, everyone thought they could go home safely for a reunion, but who knew that something would happen in the early morning? The fishing boat was thrown high by the waves, and the sound of the wind and waves outside was like the wailing of thousands of ghosts. Stay inside and don't come out. Zhou Xing quickly wrapped himself in his clothes to check the situation. I was tossed up and down inside, and I could also feel the danger at this moment, but I couldn't help, so I could only silently hope that nothing would happen. I didn't hear about a storm tonight. I don't know, there may be something under the boat, be careful. Tie the ropes. Get it done and go back to the cabin, the waves are coming. Outside were the heart-wrenching roars of the crew, sometimes clear and sometimes blurred as the boat rose and fell in the big waves. Suddenly, boom. A loud metallic crash. I heard a voice say, damn it. The door of the cargo hold was knocked open. Hussein, didn't you lock it? Quick. Save the cargo hold. That's all our harvest. Shut up, who has hands to spare? When we got on the boat, Zhou Xing took me and Zhou Lighting to visit the fishing boat. We all knew where the door of the cargo hold was. I pushed open the small door and came out, and sure enough, I saw Zhou Lighting tying a rope around his body, preparing to go out and close the cargo hold door. Give me the rope, I'll go. What are you doing? I ignored his gritted teeth and snatched the rope and tied it around myself. You can help me control the length of the rope on this end. Zhou Lighting couldn't argue with me and didn't have time to argue with me. I took a lock from the wall, turned around and rushed into the wind and waves. Yang Qian. Zhou Xing was steering the boat above. Seeing me rushing out in a single coat, he was so scared that he almost lost his soul, and shouted, Lighting. Quickly pull your mom back. Don't listen to him, let go of the rope. Fortunately, Zhou Lighting knew my temperament and obediently helped me hold the rope on that end, slowly letting me down to a position close to the cargo hold door. The fishing boat under the wind and waves was like a madman. Even if I grabbed it firmly, I would still get injured all over, but I didn't feel the pain in the heat of the moment. I desperately pried the cabin door, resisting all kinds of strange marine fish goods, and locked the door. Okay, pull me? Just when I was preparing to let Zhou Xing pull me back, I didn't expect an accident to happen. A huge wave crashed over, engulfing the entire fishing boat. Zhou Xing on the other end couldn't hold the rope at all with such great force. I was washed off the deck by the waves and fell off the side of the boat. Mom! In the coverage of the sea, I heard Zhou Xing's hoarse roar. I must have heard it wrong. There was no word mom in that guy's dictionary. I smiled wryly and treated it as if he was calling me. I pulled the rope around my waist and grabbed the railing of the boat tightly and responded, I'm fine. Take care of yourself first, don't be thrown out. Fortunately, there was a breathing time after a wave. Zhou Xing pulled the rope hard and pulled me onto the deck from the side. Then a crew member came to help after finishing his work, and quickly pulled me back into the cabin. After the ship sailed through the wind and waves, Zhou Xing ran down from above with bumps and bruises, hugged me tightly, so tightly that he was about to crush my bones. I felt the trembling on the man's body. His hands and feet were icy cold, but when he buried his head on my shoulder, there was warmth falling into my shoulder socket. Do you know that if you fall down in this situation, you won't be able to pick it up? Okay, I'm fine, right? This time it's really thanks to old Zhou's wife, that's us. Originally this trip. Say a few words less, can Hussein's dog things be more careful, how many times have I told you that you don't remember to lock the door? After the wind and waves calmed down, no one was sleepy. 1/3 of the fish in the cargo hold was gone, and a crew member raised his hand and wiped his face, as if he was about to cry. Zhou Xing sat next to me silently with his head down, holding my hand tightly, his eyelashes drooping down to cover the expression inside, but he couldn't cover the redness outside. Zhou Xing buried his head in his arms. I poked his shoulder and deliberately teased him, I heard someone calling Mom when I was outside, was that you? He turned his back to me, not saying a word. Say it again, I don't mind you calling me old. You're not waiting for your dad to change you to a younger and more beautiful stepmother, are you? Mom. Okay Yang Qian, if you say it again, I'll go home and tear down your study. A certain awkward teenager finally couldn't bear it anymore, raised his head from his arms, and glared at me angrily. But the eye sockets on that fair skin were as red as the morning glow in the sky, and there was really no deterrent power. It looked like a poor dog. Ha ha ha. I laughed, and the whole cabin laughed along. When we got off the boat at the port, Zhou Xing and the crew went to deliver the goods and split the money. I took Zhou Xing to book a B&B first. When it was getting dark, Zhou Xing came over carrying heavy luggage, holding his mobile phone to navigate, and riding a shared bicycle. Seeing that he was very tired, I quickly stepped forward with Zhou Xing to help him with his luggage. Why don't you take a taxi? He held my hand in his palm, gave the luggage to Zhou Xing, and said casually, it's not far, taking a taxi will take time. A fool could see that he was distressed about the money. The excuse was well found, and I was too lazy to expose him. Let's rest for a while and eat, I ordered takeout, I'm too lazy to go out. Okay. It was very quiet here at night. The sound of the waves was just right, neither far nor near, making people feel very at peace. Light music was playing in the B&B room. I wrapped myself in the quilt and used my mobile phone to write a manuscript. Zhou Xing took a bath for a long time. When he came out, he was wrapped in water vapor, his eyebrows were lowered, and the muscles on his body hadn't relaxed. Seeing that you're in a bad mood, what's wrong? He walked to the bed, I sat up straight, hugged his waist, and rubbed my face on his tight abdominal muscles. Don't. He gently raised my chin and pushed me away, I have something to tell you. Seeing that he was very serious, I also became nervous. Actually, this time we went to sea. He sat on the edge of the bed and lowered his head, swallowed, as if something was stuck in his throat. That is, this time we may not have earned much money. In his words, the corners of his eyes turned red again. His slender and rough fingers were twisted together, so hard that they turned white, like a prisoner confessing his crime. I know, you guys returned early, and you lost a lot of fish on the way. It's definitely not as good as before. Not only is it not as good, but this time we only split 5 or 6. Zhou Xing looked like a frightened bird breaking into the hunter's ambush, like facing a formidable enemy, like walking on thin ice, his whole body tensed. He suddenly turned sideways and tightly grasped my wrist. Yang Qian, I promise it's just this time, it will be better next year. I'll be able to earn as much as before in the new year. What I promised you won't change. On the wedding day, Zhou Xing gave me 1.5 million yuan and promised that he would have an income of 1 million yuan every year for me to spend as long as I helped him take care of Zhou Xing. I looked at the man in front of me, at his panic and nervousness, at his carefulness. I thought of his closet full of worthless clothes, and the fact that he would rather carry his luggage hard and ride a shared bicycle in order to save a few yuan for the taxi fare. Zhou Xing, do you know how long 1.5 million yuan is enough for an ordinary family to spend? I know. He didn't know, his hands were shaking, he didn't dare to hold me anymore, he even lowered his head, burying it in his palms. He needed this $1 million annual salary too much. He wanted to use this money to keep a relationship and keep a family. I seemed to hear the wailing in his heart. 10 years. His back stiffened. Under normal expenses, you can spend it for 10 years. I said, what are you worried about? Even if there's only an income of 50 to 60,000 in this half year, it's still the normal income of an ordinary family. I hugged him, wrapping the man's trembling and tense body in my arms. You have done your best. Zhou Lighting is also working very hard. He can get first place in the class every month. You have given me a very peaceful home. Suddenly, there was a hurried and messy sound of footsteps moving away outside the room door. I guessed it was Zhou Lighting eavesdropping at the door. He knew that Zhou Xing would tell me about the income. He wasn't very happy when Zhou Xing wanted to go home early. He must have been worried about the money too. Qian, will you leave? Zhou Xing hadn't relaxed yet, but his eyes lit up with little spots of light, carefully looking at me with that little hope. I held his face in my hands, looking at the man who had been worn down by the years. He should have been quite handsome when he was young, but now he was just a little darker, with some scars and the marks of time on his face. Zhou Xing, don't use money to buy feelings, and don't try to exchange money for a family. I like you, and I see your hard work and efforts. If I don't like you, or if you deliberately mistreat me, even if you give me 1 million yuan every year, I won't stay. Qian. The sea breeze was very strong and very cold at night, but the person next to me was as hot as a stove, and the fullness and security of being wrapped in his arms was fascinating. Time had taken away the sunshine from Zhou Xing, but he radiated brilliance himself. After being washed and deposited by the seawater, he was as heavy as a gem. He didn't seem to know what tiredness was all night. Before falling asleep, I complained vaguely, I thought you looked down on me and didn't want to touch me. How could I? I always wanted to. TCH, you ran faster than a rabbit when we were on the boat, as if you were afraid I would eat you. The man was silent for a long time. Just when I thought he wouldn't respond and was about to fall asleep, a sigh came from my ear. I didn't make any money, I thought you would leave, I didn't want you to think you were at a loss. Silly. Bonus story 1 asterisk. The two of them were too crazy at night, and it was almost the afternoon of the first day when they woke up. I suddenly sat up, scaring Zhou Xing next to me. What's wrong? It's 3 o'clock. We didn't take care of Zhou Lighting for half a day all night. It's easiest to have an accident when you let down your guard. Once he had suicidal thoughts at night, it had been so long, there wouldn't even be a chance to save him. This made Zhou Xing panic too. We quickly put on thick hotel bathrobes and rushed to Zhou Lighting's room in a hurry. This B&B was a suite with 2 rooms facing each other and a living room in the middle. Today, Zhou Lighting closed the door. The short distance through the living room almost made our hearts jump out of our throats. Fortunately, the door wasn't locked and Zhou Xing opened it with a twist. The curtains were tightly closed, and the light in the room was dim. We could only see a person lying on the soft bed, with the quilt only covering his waist. Lighting. Get up, don't scare Dad. Zhou Xing almost tripped over the sports shoes on the ground when he rushed to the bed. He pudao, pounce on, Zhou Lighting and shook his shoulders vigorously while shouting loudly. I quickly opened the curtains to let the sunlight in, so I could see Zhou Lighting's condition. Check his breathing, I'll call an ambulance now. Damn, was there a tsunami or an earthquake? As a result, before I could finish speaking, a hoarse and hazy teenage voice rang in Zhou Xing's arms. Zhou Lighting wasn't awake in the first place, and he was muddled by Zhou Xing shaking him. He saw Zhou Xing, and then he was shocked, his eyes widened and he grabbed Zhou Xing's collar and shouted hoarsely and frantically, Where's Yang Qian? Did she run away? I'll go find her. I'll bring her back. He pushed Zhou Xing off the bed and wanted to rush out to find me. He only realized that I was standing in front of the French windows, looking at him like an idiot, when one of his legs landed. Time seemed to stand still, and he just froze by the bed like that. I'm your stepmother, not a long-distance runner. Thank you for thinking highly of me. Don't panic, your mom is here. Seeing that he was fine, Zhou Xing finally breathed a sigh of relief and patted him on the back to comfort him. Just as I was about to relax, suddenly a black shadow rushed towards me. I suddenly felt my waist tighten and fell into a warm embrace. Zhou Lighting was taller than Zhou Xing, and the boy was like a mountain, with his muscles and bones tense, as if he was holding something precious that had been lost and found. Okay, I won't leave. Your dad and I didn't take care of you last night. We were afraid something would happen to you, so we were nervous today. Zhou Xing and I, who walked up to him, patted him on the back together, helping him recover from his nightmare just now. After a few minutes, Zhou Lighting finally recovered, let go of me and rubbed his face, then hugged me and Zhou Xing together, muttering something softly. It seemed to be, Mom, our family will be together forever. Our family. This word Mom and the 5 words our family, although the sound was so small that it could hardly be heard, it was like something hit the softest and loneliest corner of my heart. That's great, let's just live well like this. Bonus story 2 asterisk. Zhou Lighting was very promising. He never had any suicidal thoughts again. He also knew to wear his clothes properly at home and help clean the house. He always had to retort with a few words no matter what I said, but after retorting, he would still obediently listen. I also enjoyed arguing with him and then watching his face turn red with anger. Later, he was recommended to a top university, and he chose electrical engineering. I opened a flower shop near my home. After running the business smoothly, I changed to contracting fields to grow flowers for wholesale. In good times, I could earn 400,000 or 500,000 yuan a year. The work at sea was hard and dangerous. The year Zhou Lighting graduated, I didn't let Zhou Xing go anymore. I handed over the management of the fields to him, and I stayed in the flower shop writing. I originally thought that this would be very good, but Zhou Xing was better at doing business than me. He was honest and trustworthy, and the number of customers doubled in less than half a year. We had to contract hundreds of acres of land to expand production. If I could have met your dad earlier, I would have taken 10 years less of detours. Zhou Lighting and I each hugged half of a watermelon and ate it under a big poplar tree by the field. He didn't retort to me this time. He gazed at the fiery sun in the distance, his eyes sparkling, and a bittersweet and peaceful arc at the corner of his mouth. If he could have met Zhou Xing earlier, Zhou Lighting's childhood would have been much happier, at least like an average child's. Mom, in my life, I only acknowledge you as my mom. Every time people hear that my son has graduated from college, they always praise me for looking young, ha ha ha. What are you talking about that you're laughing so happily? Zhou Xing came out of the greenhouse, washed his hands in the bucket, and wrapped me in his arms habitually, as if seeking security. I dug a spoonful of watermelon and put it in his mouth, pushing him away a little. It's so hot. It's really hot, but I want to hug you. Dad. Zhou Lighting felt like a shiny light bulb and his face immediately dropped. I know you two are in a good relationship. Can you not flaunt in front of single people? I'm convinced. No one is stopping you from finding a partner. Once you pick one, Mom and Dad will go and propose for you. I deliberately, zay, cluck, little Ting Ting is not in a hurry, take your time, it's not like you're in a hurry for someone to bring you a child. One sentence left Zhou Xing speechless, and he squatted aside to eat the watermelon I was holding, blushing embarrassedly. End of the story.